So let me continue. We have so much evidence that we communicate with a higher power all the time. All right, so let's go over some of the evidence. Okay, the first piece of evidence is near-death experiences, NDEs. Near-death experiences are when you almost die, okay, or you're dead for like 10 seconds or 10 minutes, who knows. But there are thousands, tens of thousands of these testimonies on YouTube, and they all say the same thing. When they die, they see a tunnel, and at the tunnel, there's a light that draws them. Okay, they go, and then suddenly they are high up, and they feel tremendous love, peace, forgiveness, compassion. It's all good. And then they submit to a life review. They have a chance to reflect on their entire life. They can see all the pain they caused. They can see all the good they've done in the world. And then they're asked by a higher force, and it's like God or an angel, but like there are different interpretations, okay? Do you want to go back? And they always say, yes, I need to go back. Why? Because I need to tell people about my experience. And they come back extremely changed people. And again, these are people who don't know each other. And maybe before they were atheists or just scientists. But once they have these experiences, it changes them forever, okay? So near-death experiences, we have problems explaining why this is the case. Second is the idea of psychedelics. Okay. Okay, psychedelics. So throughout human history, every culture has used psychedelics because psychedelics were a way for shamans or priests to access the divine. And what's really interesting is when you use a certain type of psychedelic, you end up seeing the same images regardless of who you are. Okay? And that's why civilizations throughout human history, what's amazing is if you go back to the ancient past and you look at different civilizations in different parts of the world, they have very similar statues and paintings, okay? So what's a very common motif is the idea of the cosmic serpent. For whatever reason, every early civilization has worshipped a serpent, or the serpent is a very important part of their culture. And it's possible that when there are psychedelics and they're meditating, they see a serpent talking to them. And they see that as the serpent of life, okay? And also, what's really interesting is the serpent, it looks like the DNA, right? Okay, so that's really, really interesting. Okay? Meditation. When people meditate, when you go up to a higher dimension, you end up having the same experience as psychedelics and near-death experiences. Also, great books. I myself have never done psychedelics. I obviously can't go back in the past and study these civilizations. I never had a near-death experiences, but I've read Dante, I've read Milton, I've read Homer, I've studied them very, very closely. And what's amazing to me is they say the same things. When Dante, in his Divine Comedy, when he describes the universe, when he describes God, when he describes the heavens, it's almost as though he's describing a near-death experience. Even though we have absolutely no evidence that Dante himself had near-death experiences. Okay? So this is shocking. Okay, so there's a lot of evidence that there's a higher force beyond us. So the spirit world does exist. Again, I can't prove it exists, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest it does exist. Okay? So now the question then is, if our current model of reality doesn't really work, what is another possibility? Okay? And in this class, I'm not trying to tell you what is true, but I'm just trying to present to you new possibilities. So what I'm going to do now is I will present to you a new possibility of how reality is structured. Okay? All right. So to begin, let's talk about Kant. Immanuel Kant was the greatest philosopher who ever lived, the most influential philosopher who ever lived, because he introduced us the idea that we are not observers of reality, we are participants in reality. All right? So let me explain what he means. For Kant, there's the noumena. The noumena just means reality that is outside of us, the things in themselves. What he tells us is we can never know the noumena. We can never know this reality. Why? Because whenever we see reality, we filter it using time and space. Okay? So time and space do not exist outside of us. They are parts of us. We use time and space in order to interpret reality in a way that allows us to make sense of it. Okay? So the noumena for time and space becomes the phenomena. And that's all we see, the phenomena, the things that are to me, not the noumena, the things in themselves. Okay? And so we imagine reality. We hallucinate reality. Okay, but of course, this creates three problems. Okay, the first problem is, what is the noumena? The second problem is, why do we have these filters, time and space? The third problem is, how can we guarantee that what I see is the same as what you see? Because if reality is a subjective experience, then in theory, everyone should see it differently. But we all see it the same, okay? So why is that? So these are the three problems. And so what happens is that Hegel comes along, okay? Hegel, another German philosopher, and he explains the idea of the Geist. So what he's saying is that the noumena, it's really the spirit world. It's the Geist. And when you do this, it solves all three problems, okay? The noumena you can never access because it's beyond us. It's a Geist that gives us time and space. And as a result, because it's all coming from one source, we see the world in the same way. Okay? All right. So this sounds complicated, but let me now use quantum mechanics to explain what this means, okay? Let's talk about quantum mechanics. Okay, so in science class, you're taught the Neal-Bohr model of the atom. Okay? It's a simple model. You have the nucleus, and then around the nucleus, you have these electrons that orbit the nucleus. Okay? You're taught this in physics class. If you are in a more advanced physics, you will taught that it's actually an electron cloud. Why? Because we never know for sure where electrons are. So we can only know the probability of where they are in orbit, okay? So it's called an electron cloud. And this is what you're taught in school. When you go to university, you will be taught this is completely and utterly wrong. Why? Because this assumes that these atoms are matter, they're solid. But in reality, if you go deep enough, you will find that they are actually just vibrations, what we call quantum fields. And they are just vibrations. And what the electron really is an intersection of these quantum fields. Also, these quantum fields can always exist in two states. The first is as a wave. The second is as a particle. Okay? And we can only know if it's a wave or a particle by observing it. And this is what's called a wave function collapse. In other words, all of nature is vibrational. It's energy. And it's only when we observe it, when we interact with it, that becomes something solid that we can see and measure and touch. Okay? It's called a wave function collapse. Okay? So, this is complicated. So, a physicist named Ernst Schrödinger, he creates a thought experiment called Schrödinger's cat. Okay? You may have heard of it, Schrödinger's cat. And so, imagine a box, and inside is a cat. And then the cat, inside the box is also some toxic chemicals. that may or may not break. If it breaks, the cat dies. If it doesn't break, the cat's still alive. And what Schrödinger teaches us is that when the box is unopened, we can never know the state of the cat. It's only when we open it can we know it's dead or alive. But before then, it's both dead and alive. Okay? That's simple to understand. But then another physicist introduced a new concept called the friend experiment, or Wigner's friend. And this is more complicated because he says, okay, if you are the experimenter and you open a box, you now know the state of the cat. But what if you're a friend? Okay? You don't see the box. You're outside the laboratory. When the experimenter opens the box, does the wave function collapse? And the answer is, it does not. Okay? It does not. And what this is telling us is there is no objective reality that exists outside of you. When the experimenter opens the box, the wave function collapses for him, but does not collapse for the observer and for anyone else. We have to open the box ourselves in order to see if the cat is alive or dead. Okay? But what if this person tells us? The answer is, it still doesn't collapse. We have to participate in the reality ourselves. And what this is saying, okay, this is hard to understand, is that everyone lives in his or her own reality. Everyone has a unique universe onto himself or herself. And that's what quantum mechanics teaches us. Okay? All right. So now let's try to, based on all this, okay, Kant and quantum mechanics, create a theory of reality. Okay? So what's important to understand is that everything are just vibrations. Okay? That's all it is. It's vibrations. Yeah?
But I thought like quantum mechanics can only be applied on quantum, whereas we are a macro creature that is not like...
Yeah, that is correct. But quantum mechanics is the basis of reality, right? Okay? So everything are just vibrations. Now, what happens is that what we need to understand is that if it's vibrations, if it's energy, it's also information. Okay, does that make sense? All right? So what our brains do is, our brains are not independent. Our brains connect to the universe, okay? So as the universe is vibrating, we're receiving information. And then through our experiences, okay, this vibration allows us to turn it into memories. You understand? We're taking this vibrational information, we're taking our experiences, we're combining to memories. Now, this is really important. The memories now go back to the vibrational force. So our memories are connecting to the universe, and they're being stored in the universe. They're being imprinted in the universe. It's an imprint. And of course, is no different from the internet, right? On the computer, whatever you write is being stored on the internet. So whatever you do is going to change the internet. And you receive information from the internet, okay? So you're participating in the internet, and you're part of the internet. Okay, and the same thing is happening here. Okay? So everything's vibrational. If it's vibrational, it's information. We take the information and we combine with the experience to turn into memories. The memories then go back to the universe. And so it's as though we can implant ourselves into the universe. Okay? Now, this is hard to understand. So what we've done is every single culture has turned this knowledge into a story that is easy for people to understand. Okay? So I'm going to tell you this story. And this story, this framework, I'm actually using Dante, okay? All right, Dante. What does Dante tell us about the universe? Okay, just a monad. The one, God, who knows, okay? but it's a source of everything. And so what he does is he vibrates, he emanates, he thinks, he breathes. And this creates vibrational force, right? And this vibrational force creates new forces called dyads. Dyads are pairs. And when the pairs come together and vibrate, they create new things, okay? So this is how creation happens, through vibration, through the combination of different forces, okay? Now, what's important to understand is that as the dimensions go lower, the frequency decreases. So at high, it's really fast, right? It's like, ah! Okay? When it goes low, it becomes low frequency, oh, okay? And eventually, you get a point where matter can be created, okay? So this is spirit, this is matter, and this is the world that we live in. Okay? So now the question then is, why is the universe set up in this way? And it has to do with the fact that the universe, the monad, strives for newness, for imagination, for freshness. The problem, though, is that in the spirit world, everything is perfect. Everything is eternal. Everything is immutable. And so by definition, you can feel no pain. You cannot suffer. You cannot make any mistakes. Therefore, you cannot have any new experiences. Therefore, you cannot have any imagination. So we humans exist in order to solve this problem. We humans are corporal, which all it just means is we have bodies, okay? If you have bodies, you get old, you bleed, you get hurt, you fall down, okay? You feel anger, you feel hate. But this allows us to have an imagination. And the imagination allows the universe to grow, to expand, to vibrate. Okay? That's our function. To have experiences that are new, which expands the consciousness of the universe. The universe itself is consciousness.